Every story has a beginning, and this one is just getting started. If this chapter pulled you in, take a second and comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story has reached. And hey, if you felt even a spark of emotion, hit that subscribe button and tap the bell, and because tomorrow a secret will be revealed that changes everything. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for being part of this journey. We'll see you in the next chapter. A basket, 2 babies, and a lie that changed everything. It was a cold winter night in Aspen, Colorado. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the pine trees and winding mountain roads in a thick white silence. Inside a 15,000-square-foot mansion perched on the hillside, billionaire Richard Blake sat alone in his grand study. A room lined with antique books, crystal decanters, and polished oak furniture. The fireplace crackled, casting warm, flickering shadows across the walls, but Richard barely noticed. His mind was deep in numbers, deals, and the latest expansion of his tech empire. At 48, Richard had built everything from scratch. He wasn't born into money. In fact, he had clawed his way up from a childhood marked by abandonment and cold institutions, the kind of past he never talked about. Control was his currency. Emotion was a liability. Everything in his life was structured, precise and solitary. So when the doorbell rang at 11:27 p.m., he was not just surprised, he was annoyed. No one ever came here unannounced, especially not during a snowstorm. He paused, then rose from his leather chair, walking briskly across the marble floor of the main hallway. As he opened the massive front door, a blast of icy wind hit him full, in the face. And then he froze. There, on the front step, half buried in falling snow, was a basket. A worn, hand-woven one, barely covered with a thin blanket now soaked from the storm. Richard's breath caught in his throat. At first he didn't move. He just stared, heart thudding. Slowly he knelt down and pulled back the damp fabric. 2 tiny faces. Infants, twin girls, no more than a few weeks old, lay curled beside each other, fast asleep. Their cheeks were pink from the cold, but they were breathing alive and completely alone. For a long moment Richard couldn't speak, couldn't think. His mind, so used to logic and strategy, couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. But his hands moved before his brain did, lifting the basket gently, carrying it inside, shutting the door against the storm. He placed them carefully on the rug before the fire. They stirred but didn't cry. Just small sleeping souls in a world they never asked for. Richard knelt beside them, staring in silence. And something shifted, deep inside. Something he hadn't felt in decades. "Who left you here?" He whispered almost to himself. "And why, me?" He sat there, unmoving, for nearly an hour. The babies breathed softly, one letting out a tiny sigh in her sleep. The mansion, once a monument to silence and control, now held something new: vulnerability, life. That night, Richard Blake's world, carefully constructed, perfectly calculated, began to unravel, and he didn't even know their names yet. The following morning, the snow had stopped, but Richard's mind was still buried in a blizzard of questions. He hadn't slept. The twins were now resting in the guest room, their soft breaths rising and falling under warm blankets. Richard had spent the entire night pacing his mansion, trying to piece together what had just happened. Who would leave 2 newborns, in the dead of night, in the middle of a storm, outside his home, and why? By 7 a.m. his assistant Claire Morgan arrived, visibly stunned to find twin babies in the master wing of the house. "Richard, what the hell is going on?" she asked, wide-eyed, holding a warm bottle he'd fumbled through ordering online at 3 a.m. "I don't know," he said honestly, his voice rough. "But I need answers. Now." Claire, ever the fixer, sprang into action. She contacted local hospitals, ran facial scans, checked missing persons databases. Nothing. No reports, no match, no clue. The only thing they had was a single detail. "A faint embroidery on the edge of the baby blanket, LB. I've seen that monogram before," Claire said slowly. "Years ago." Richard turned to her, his pulse picking up. "Where?" She hesitated. "At a benefit in San Francisco. You were with a woman, tall, brunette. Her name was Laura Bennett, I think. The name hit Richard like a thunderclap. Laura Bennett. They'd met 27 years ago. A short, intense relationship during a chaotic time in his life. He hadn't seen her since. No goodbye, no closure. Just gone. But there was one thing he did remember. She was pregnant. And she told him it wasn't his, or so he thought. Within hours, Claire had tracked down a private investigator. By sunset, he called with a name. Richard, we found someone. Olivia Bennett, 27 years old. No legal father listed on her birth certificate. Richard sat down hard. Olivia? He whispered. Yeah, the investigator continued. She has 2 daughters, born just under a month ago, twins. His hands trembled. His world, already shaken, now cracked wide open. The babies weren't strangers. They were blood. And Olivia was his daughter. But the question that haunted him louder than any headline or business deal was this. Why would his own daughter abandon her children at his doorstep without a word? Claire looked at him, concern in her voice. Richard, this wasn't random. Someone left those girls here for a reason. Richard stood, looking out the massive window, watching the snowfall slowly melt under the morning sun. Then we find her, he said. We find Olivia. We find out what the hell is going on. But deep in his gut, Richard knew this wasn't just a reunion. This was the beginning of something much bigger and far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And the past, it was no longer buried. It was coming back. Fast. It took less than 48 hours to find Olivia. She was hiding in a rundown motel just outside of Denver, alone, exhausted, and terrified. When Richard and Claire arrived, she didn't open the door right away. But when she finally did, the look in her eyes told Richard everything. She wasn't running from him. She was running from something much worse. I had no choice, she said, her voice breaking as she sat down across from her father, the man she never thought she'd meet. I didn't know if I could trust you, or if you were part of... Part of what? Richard asked, his voice low. Olivia took a shaky breath, then reached into her bag and slid a worn flash drive across the table. This, she said. This is what got my dad killed. Richard's stomach turned. Your dad? David Blake, Olivia said. Your half-brother. The air in the room shifted. Richard leaned back in his chair, blindsided. He had no idea he had a half-brother, let alone that Olivia was his niece and or daughter, if the rumors about her mother were true. It was all tangled, messy. But one thing was clear. Olivia wasn't lying. She continued. My father was investigating something huge. Fraud, bribery, shell companies, false patents, a whole web of dirty money hidden behind legitimate tech firms. He said the name Victor Caldwell kept coming up. That name Richard knew all too well. Victor Caldwell had been a rival of Richard's for over a decade, charming on the outside, vicious behind the scenes. Their companies had gone head-to-head in multiple mergers. But this was no longer corporate competition. This was something darker. David was planning to go public, Olivia said, but before he could, he died. Car accident. At least, that's what they called it. She wiped her eyes. After the funeral, I started receiving threats, anonymous calls, messages. They told me to disappear, or my daughters would be next. Richard sat in silence, fists clenched. That's why she left the twins. That's why she brought them to him. Because she knew no one else could protect them. Because somewhere deep down, she trusted him. Claire's phone buzzed. A message. From the private investigator. She read it and looked up, pale. We've got a bigger problem, she said. Victor Caldwell's team knows we've found Olivia. They're watching the mansion and they know about the babies. Richard stood slowly, his expression hardening. They want a war, he said. They're about to get one. But even as he said the words, part of him knew this was more than business, this was personal. He wasn't just protecting assets anymore, he was protecting blood. And if Victor Caldwell thought Richard Blake would fold under pressure, he was about to learn what family really meant. Richard didn't waste time. By the next morning, his mansion had turned into a command center. Lawyers, cybersecurity experts, and former intelligence operatives were brought in. Surveillance was upgraded, security doubled. The twins were moved to a secure wing of the estate guarded 24/7. But Richard knew defense wasn't enough anymore. It was time to go on the offensive. Claire and Olivia worked day and night assembling the evidence David had left behind. Files from offshore accounts, encrypted messages, hidden wire transfers, even audio recordings that placed Victor Caldwell at the center of a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme. And that wasn't all. The data also revealed connections to federal officials, rival CEOs, and even a few journalists, all paid to stay quiet or look the other way. The deeper Richard went, the uglier it got, but the truth had weight, and Richard was ready to drop it like a bomb. 3 days later, at precisely 1 p.m., Richard Blake stepped onto the stage at a press conference streamed live from his company's headquarters in New York City. He stood tall, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, with Olivia at his side and Claire in the front row, her expression steady. "Good afternoon," Richard began, his voice firm. "Today isn't about business, it's about truth and family." Behind him, massive LED screens lit up, displaying documents, timelines, and audio recordings that laid out the Caldwell Network's crimes step by step. As the media scrambled to take it all in, Richard kept speaking. "My half-brother David Blake uncovered this conspiracy. He died before he could reveal it. His daughter, my daughter, and her children were threatened. That ends today." Reporters erupted with questions. But before Richard could answer a single one, the back doors of the auditorium slammed open. Victor Caldwell walked in, flanked by 2 suited men, and wearing that signature smug smile. He slowly clapped as he approached. "The stage. Well played, Blake," he said. "I'll give you that." Richard didn't flinch. "You're done, Victor." Victor laughed. "You think this changes anything? I built this industry. I own it." "No," Richard replied. Calm, but cold. "You stole it, and now everyone knows." Suddenly, sirens wailed outside. A swarm of federal agents entered moments later, weapons holstered, badges out. "Victor Caldwell," one of them announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Victor's face dropped. The cameras caught everything. As Victor was cuffed and led out, Richard turned back to the crowd. "This isn't just justice for my family. This is a warning to anyone who thinks power puts them above the truth." The room erupted, reporters shouted, phones rang. The internet exploded within minutes. But through the noise, Richard felt something he hadn't in years: clarity, strength, purpose. For the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting for profit or legacy. He was fighting for his daughter, for his granddaughters, for redemption. But as he left the stage, a single thought haunted him. What if this was just the beginning? The world now knew the truth. Within hours of Victor Caldwell's arrest, the news had gone global. Headlines read, "Corporate Empire Crumbles, Victor Caldwell Exposed," and "Richard Blake's Shocking Family Reveal Goes Viral." But inside the Blake mansion, things were far from calm. Olivia sat in the sunroom, her daughters napping nearby, as she scrolled through an endless stream of news alerts. The press was split. Some praised Richard's courage, others questioned the timing. Some even speculated it was all a PR stunt. And then came the real threat. A video uploaded anonymously. It showed Laura Caldwell, Victor's sister, sitting in what looked like a private studio, her tone calm, her words sharp. "My brother. Maybe behind bars," she said, "but the Blake family still has secrets. Secrets they've hidden from the world, and from each other. Those twins? They're heirs to the Caldwell legacy, and I have the proof." Olivia's heart stopped. By the time Richard entered the room, Claire already had the video on the big screen. "She's coming after the girls," Claire said, her voice tight. "She's filing for custody." Richard stood in silence for a moment, his jaw clenched. "They've lost power, so now they're coming for what matters most," he said. "Family." The next few days were chaos. Lawyers prepared to fight the custody case, while Claire's team dug into Laura's connections. Jennifer, Olivia's long-lost mother, arrived unexpectedly, bringing with her sealed documents, letters, and proof of everything Victor and Laura had tried to bury for years. One night, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Olivia, the twins, Claire, Richard, and now Jennifer, a soft knock came at the door. A young man stood outside, nervous, his hands shaking slightly. "My name is Eric," he said. "Eric Caldwell." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Eric. The twins' father. "I didn't know what my family was doing," he said. "I swear I didn't even know Olivia was pregnant until it was too late." Richard watched him closely. He wanted to hate the boy, wanted to send him away. But there was something in Eric's voice, something real, something broken. "I don't want money," Eric said. "I just want to know them, to do the right thing." For the first time in a long time, Richard saw a reflection of himself, a man trying to fix what others had shattered. But before he could respond, Claire burst into the room. "We have a problem," she said, holding her phone. A new video had just dropped, this time from an unknown source but with inside footage. Camera feeds, private documents, security logs. Someone had breached the Blake estate. "We have a mole," Claire whispered, "and Laura isn't working alone." Richard looked around at the people he'd grown to love, Olivia, the girls, even Eric, his family, and he made a decision. "No more waiting," he said. "We end this, all of it, before they take anything else." Because now, it wasn't just about legacy or justice, it was survival. This story, it's more than just twists and secrets. It's about family, betrayal, and the fight to protect what truly matters. But now we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Richard's shoes? Could you trust someone like Eric? Do you believe Laura Caldwell is finished, or is something even bigger coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Below, theories, emotions, favorite scenes. We read every single one. And let us know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how this story connects with people across the world. If this chapter pulled you in, hit like, share it with someone who loves suspense, and don't forget to subscribe. Because the next episode, it might just change everything. Your voice helps shape this journey. This isn't just a story we're telling you, it's one we're building together. So go ahead, comment below, and let's talk about it. Because after all, every great story deserves to be shared.